Bitcoin Liberty Live, episode 11. Here we are, folks. It's another week. It's been one hell of a week. What do you say of this week?
I have no idea.
How are you hodling up?
I'm hodling great, man. I'm loving this week, man. I don't know.
That's the thing. It's like I thought, it's funny because I made a joke months ago, a couple months ago, when I think it first broke 50 and then went on to 60. And I thought, we're never going to see 50K Bitcoin again. And, kind of the lamentation of the cheaper sats. And so then when it goes up and then it goes down, I have to remind myself, geez, it wasn't that long ago that 50 was a big breakthrough. And
yeah. I
was, we can't get it as, like we could before. But how am I complaining?
Exactly.
It's people who aren't, or people who have their different approaches to Bitcoin. Sometimes it's like, ooh, how are you holding up? And I tweeted a little thing last night. I was like, I'm hodling up. I'm holding up good. I'm hodling up.
Yeah. Exactly.
So this is your opportunity, folks. Hodl up, because it's an opportunity in one sense, the broad span of opportunity we've had riding here.
Yeah. Well, as I'm very fond of saying, Bitcoin is the world-leading expert in kicking gamblers in the dick. So
that's right.
I mean, like people that make any sort of price prognostications or whatever, I just go, whatever. It's all silly in the long scheme. Like in the long range, long game, you kind of go like, all right, just stack sats, stay humble, stack sats. It's the easiest thing in the world. The beauty of it, I actually just put, hey, there's Travis.
Yep. Travis, can you hear us? See us?
Hi, Travis.
I can hear and see you. How are you,
we
me?
Can't hear Travis.
Let me turn this up.
Oh, this is going to be fun.
We're sorting out our technology here. Say something so we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Only barely.
Just barely. It's my phone. We can hear you. Cool.
Nice.
We just started rolling here, so we're recording live. If you didn't know that.
Okay.
Our buddy, we're live right now.
We're
live, not live, but
we're just recording. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Do you have to work today? Let me turn this.
No, I don't have to. I was a little bit, but I'm a psychopath, so sometimes I just work.
Yeah, when you're a psychopath, that's the thing. 4th of July picnics, I'm sitting around and I'm framing everything around what Bitcoin's doing, and people are talking about the big game or whatever, and I've got a meta level of analysis on it all about it's the money. Yeah. And I'm like, no, stop. I'm just be with family. Anyway.
Yeah, not every conversation has to include words like inflation and monetary debasement and.
Sure they do.
Yeah, you're right.
It's like, yeah, you're talking with family and they bring up some random thing in their lives and there's this little creature behind you saying, tell them about the inflation.
Yeah, just shoehorn Bitcoin into every conversation. Like, hey, my kid just started swim lessons. Have I told you about Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that problem too. But I've been trying to control myself so I don't come off as too obsessive with Bitcoin.
We need a speaker, man.
Yeah, my phone's kind of funny here.
That thing
I can hear you, but you just have to talk loud so we can hear you. I'm sure it's recording fine.
Yeah.
Out, I guess. Yeah, well, Travis is our good buddy who largely...
Who are you talking to?
I'm talking to Travis.
Right. Hi, Travis, you're our good buddy.
You're our good buddy, Travis. Back in the day, Travis orange pilled me in various ways. I mean, I was on the path. At the time, I still was studying things about Ethereum. And, I mean, you got to know.
Shitcoiner.
You got to learn.
You got to learn.
You got to learn before you can know why it's shit.
Yeah.
So I was learning. And there were, when you have stuff, okay, you're holding some stuff or it's locked up in some way and you can't get it out and you're stuck and you realize this is shit. Anyway, so this would have been like 2-3 years ago, I think. And I think I was the only other person in our world that, other than Daniel, I'd met Daniel earlier.
I was shitcoin then too, so.
And at some level, we were all shitcoin. I think when I'd met Daniel, I had just sold all of my ETH. I was just like, I am done with this. I see where it's going, and I'm like done. And I I just OTC'd it all over to Bitcoin. And we had that conversation back in the day. And I just sort of become the maxi that,
that you always knew you could be.
That I always knew I wanted to be. And right around that time, Travis was beyond me. Travis, you were way beyond ready you'd been a maxi for a while. But it was good conversations for me to have to like reorient and maintain my perspective on what is true and healthy about being a Bitcoiner. And anyway, so Travis, thank you for
what'd you do to Orange Pill Fritz?
I don't remember, but
just your
I usually talk a lot about the technical stuff about Bitcoin, so that probably had something to do with it.
Yeah, we'd be up in your neck of the woods at the courthouse, whatnot, and chatting about. I would bring up crypto-related ideas about the landscape generally, and you were really good, quick, and sharp to say, "No, man, what are you doing?" I was like, "Yeah, you're right." It kind of helped keep me anchored and my compass intact. So
nice.
But you coaxed me along in the good straight direction.
Yeah, you would have ended up where you were anyways, but maybe I expedited the process a little bit. But
well, I think just hearing it from somebody else, and you haven't done your own proof of work and studies about it, I would bring up ideas, and you were just right there, like, oh yeah, this, that, and more, and I'm like, wow, here's someone who's I can learn from, because otherwise it's a real bunch of crickets out there. Sometimes you mention it and people don't even know where to start. There's a lot of fiat bros and
ton of free up bros.
Boomers and all kinds of stuff where you run into this inertia of you're on track, you're giddy, you're excited, you're learning, and you mention it and they're like, whoa. You mentioned a math or is this anti-government? I'm like, wow. Right now.
Yeah.
Well, what are you today, man?
Say again?
What are you working on today?
I am working on I have a studio apartment that I need to remodel. And so I was working on it a little bit.
Working in the meat space?
Yeah. Actually, 2 days ago, I hurt my leg
and
took some like muscle relaxers, got the doc to check it out. And I'm just getting old, I guess, but I've like recovered now. So now I have all this work to catch up on.
Oh, damn.
So I'll be doing some of that. And then I was doing some of my remote work, just like, at 9 or so, just a little bit of work while we went live here.
Oh, cool.
I was thinking, you reminded me, it is funny when you're in the space long enough where you start talking to like the guys that are really into fiat and they'll say things and you can just tell by the statements they're making and the arguments they're making that they haven't looked into Bitcoin at all. So like things like comments like, well, what if someone turns the internet off, stuff like that. It's like, man, I don't even know if I should respond to you because I don't think you understand the internet either. Yeah. It's just like, where do you start with some of those folks? It's funny.
What if a meteor hit the earth and took out all of humanity? Where would Bitcoin be? Exactly. I mean, geez, then Bitcoin doesn't run, right?
Yeah, or they're concerned about security, and it's like, have you ever been this concerned about the security at Wells Fargo?
Right. Yeah. Seriously.
Or should we compare them?
Yeah,
let's do that.
Dealing with little scammy stuff with texts or calls or phishing stuff,
email. Yeah.
And I've had to call the bank and just say, hey, I got this call, or just making sure this transaction's not on your radar or is, and you're aware of it. I mean, that's just the bank. That's just Amazon.com orders, whatever. We deal with that all the time, and so yeah.
Yeah, well, like you said, man, it just the second you hear these folks open their mouth, like it's amazing how many of them are just straight up bots. Like they just parrot the same shit. There's like 12 talking points. I think someone put a little chart on Twitter. They're like, just here's your responses to the 9 common, just nonsense things people are going to spout at you. And it's all thoughtless. They just go, I heard somewhere that, and they just spit it out. But it reminds me of a guy, he's some comedian, and he said, his dad, you know, they're watching a movie with Tommy Lee Jones, and his dad looks over and goes, "Oh yeah, Tommy Lee Jones. I heard he's gay." And so this guy just ran with it for like the next 20 years. He's just like, "Oh yeah, Tommy." He'd go to a party. "Oh, Tommy Lee Jones. I heard he's gay." And then
Nice.
he ended up, you know, like, when he became more famous as a comedian, he was talking to somebody and he said, "Oh yeah, you know, Tommy Lee Jones, he's gay." And he goes, "I've known Tommy Lee Jones 35 years. He's not gay. What are you talking about? Married to this lady. He dated my friend." And he goes, "Oh, well, how'd you?" So he got all pissed because he felt like an asshole. He went back and talked to his dad, and his dad, "What? I've been telling people for 20 years that Tommy Lee Jones is gay because you said so. Where did you hear that?" He goes, "Oh, I must have been wrong." You know, I mean, it was just like, but it was just something he just parroted for, you know, like mindlessly. Didn't think about it, never thought to question it. And that's about the status of some movie star that, you know, who gives a shit, right? So when it comes to like money stuff, you just kind of go, yeah, people are just going to bot their way through life. They're just no concept of what's happening to them, their money, any of it. So
I think that's like human nature with everything, where there's a lot of info out there. People are doing all kinds of stuff. The human brain is only so big to like really know and manage it all. So we take all these shortcuts, or you hear something, and your own ego is like, well, I can't not understand it, so I'm just going to say I do as if my level of understanding is what it is. And so like it could be anything, and people, you know, a new car. And people are like, "Oh yeah, I heard this and that. You know, whatever." And so they feed off. It can be susceptible to propaganda or random headlines, but it's that hook that people have, and they just hang on to because that's what they know now.
Yeah, it's like a little heuristic, right?
Yeah, but they can say that and sound like, "Well, I know something," and it's like, no. These are rabbit holes that you need to learn, and you can't just say you know. So,
yeah, what's good about all this is that with Bitcoin currently, you have to opt into it, right? You have to be like intentional about it. And so if you're like a person that's ignorant and either by choice or just that's your nature, you can't really affect Bitcoin, right? Like you're not going to influence it, or as opposed to other things that you could be ignorant on, like just democratic politics, where those ignorant people are voting and they're going to affect your life probably, possibly, right? Depending on what it is.
Right.
Whereas if they don't get Bitcoin, it's kind of like, well, I don't really care. Like they're going to probably not use it, and that's on them. And they just haven't opted in. And in the meantime, the network's running a lot, you know, the development is continuing and people are running nodes, right? And everything's unaffected because so so people's ignorance, you know, it can't be really weaponized against Bitcoin. I like that.
Yeah, I think it's awesome, man.
and even as we all, you know, we've all done our share of work, and maybe you the most, Travis, on orange pilling people. We've got a meetup this evening up in Sherman County. I'll be going, and we've got meetups. We've done a lot of these meetups, and it's
yeah, that's where all three of us meet up.
well, there may be some new faces this evening, but
yeah, there'll probably be a good. There's going to be a few people there.
Well, there was
that aren't usually there
about a
this
week
evening.
ago. Guy Swan had a post up about just sort of maybe it's orange pilling is done. Just we sort of hit our limit on orange pilling, and it's just time to, you know, you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. Just stop trying so hard. It doesn't matter. You've orange pilled who you can. And while part of me, like, I get it because you sort of, within your community, depending on who you're around and what that is, you run into just, well, I'm tapped out on my relationships with everybody in the world. And so then it's just like time to like just back off and do my thing and stop beating my head against the wall. But again, you never give up because they'll re-enter at a price they think they deserve, I suppose. I don't know.
I kind of take a different view. I mean, like, I feel like it's a duty to be relentless in this and just out as much as possible, right? Like, and the thing is, I'm coming from an exposure sort of thing, right? Like, the amount of exposure people get to shitty information is, like, relentless. It's never ending. And so I feel like it's important for people like us to be a relentless source of counterfactual information and just going, hey, I get where you're coming from, and you may consider, and you may, because there's somewhere in there you're gonna find a chink in that armor, and once chinked, I think that armor comes off pretty quick because. And you can see it, like someone will lose their job or some shit will happen, or their bank account will get frozen, or they'll lose their access to their PayPal because they posted some fucking flag thing or whatever. And next thing you know, if they don't have that other fountain of information kind of coming in, they just might make that little cognitive connection and just go like, hey, wait a minute, that one asshole that never shuts up about Bitcoin mentioned something about this. I should go talk to him again. And the network gets stronger the more people we add to it. And like Sailor said something at Prague, said, we got to spread Bitcoin with love and just kind of understand, like I was a Bitcoin hater not really hater. I mean, I would like trade it and shit like that. But I thought like Bitcoin had as much use as Dogecoin. Like I thought, it just it's no different. It's just some gambling token, blah, 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 blah. And I had all my reasons, and I'm a very thoughtful person. And I thought, well, this is all very reasonable to me.
That was years ago.
It actually wasn't. I mean, this was, just like 2 years ago, maybe. I was still talking shit like that. And it was because of people relentlessly feeding information to me that it finally overcame my own bias and my own nonsense and my own thinking too highly of myself to finally just wake up and go, oh, shit, dude, you're way wrong. In fact, it's people like me that are the toughest orange pill because I'm just so darn reasonable.
Did I help orange pill you?
You did, probably. I mean,
I think in its own way, it wasn't like this big, here, swallow this, choke. Okay, you're
Right.
good now.
It's gradually.
It was Travis, it was Daniel, and it was gradually, and it just hit these little random chinks in my mind that I relented. At one point, I was like, nope, I get it. And I needed the reminders.
I mean, I get where Guy Swan is coming from, though, right? Like, you can see how you get kind of tired of this shit, but...
With people, I've tried, I've mentioned it, they bring something else up, I fix that, and they're stuck, and I'm just like, whatever. I stopped trying, unless there's maybe an opportunity where they mention something. 2 separate cases, one in my own family and one with a good friend, happen to be people they know who live in Mexico, or they sold some property in Mexico, and they're having a hell of a time trying to remain legal while physically moving cash across the border, working with a realtor who they're trusting, or working with family who has to do it in amounts over time and all this stuff.
Doing a little bulk cash smuggling. All right, so made them out, baby.
Yeah. So I know, like, good, responsible, patriotic Americans who are
They
trying
got coyotes.
to
You can put that shit in a backpack. They'll just walk right across
It's
the border.
ridiculous.
Man. It's like $500.
And part of if that other person is willing to learn something or start something and do a Bitcoin thing, this is fixable. You can move what you need where you need it, and it's not in a country anywhere. It's on the blockchain. You could be done, and meanwhile they've spent months or years trying to like not break the law, moving cash. It's like, oh my god, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, you talked to Guy Swan a couple weeks back, right?
Yeah, I did.
Like,
I was on his show.
Cruise, he just like sponsored by Swan.
He has I think Swan sponsors him, and then his last name's just a coincidence. It has an extra N. But yeah, I like Guy Swan. He's a good dude. I met him in person in Miami last year at the conference.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I bought him a drink and we talked about LP Mises Caucus kind of stuff. But it was fun.
Are you going to?
Well, go ahead.
Or are you going to Nashville?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be there. I think it's just in a few weeks. It's like the end of this month.
Yeah.
So I'll be there for a week.
Oh, nice.
We have taken the wife. We have every night we have like a party or an event planned to attend. So it's going to be
bundled with the Swan crew, or are you just going by yourself?
I'm not officially there representing Swan. They're not sending me, in other words. But I think there are definitely a lot of Swan folks that are going to be there, and so I'll inevitably link up with some of them and party, and it's always fun to meet fellow Swans in person. And a lot of the crowds I'm in have a lot of like Swan folks in it already, so it's not really as small. The Bitcoin world's not very big, it seems, at conferences. Yeah. You just kind of
surprising. Well, what'd you think of that Bitcoin magazine thing they just came out with? Hodlers should be taxed. Like,
I am not aware of this. What happened?
what'd you say? Sorry.
Oh, I said I didn't hear anything about this. So what's
Uh,
the?
Some
They
guy,
had an article,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I haven't read the article, but the headline of the article was that hodlers should pay fees, like for the sake
Oh,
of the robustness of the network or for the monetary, uh, medium of exchange. That hodlers are not helping.
The security budget.
Yeah, it's like a security budget.
that
And
seems.
it's like,
My initial thought here is that's absurd and unenforceable, but
Correct. I agree. And that's the thing I don't get about these guys is like I can't tell if they're just sort of deliberately, like generating some controversy so they can get some traffic to the magazine or just starting discussions, or if they actually genuinely believe this shit about like NFTs and wizards and all this crap that they do. It's really
yeah,
hard to parse out what they're doing. But Max Kaiser came out and said, weeks ago they just said, all you guys that are shitting on Bitcoin Magazine, go fuck yourselves. These guys have done more for Bitcoin than any of you fucking clowns on Twitter ever have. So shut the fuck.
well, that is probably true.
Exactly.
I mean, they do host these conferences all around the world, right? So that's probably true. I am turned off from the magazine because of their. I mean, they seem to be like really embracing and advocating and sponsoring like this whole the wizard stuff, right? And
Yeah.
all that NFT on Bitcoin kind of stuff. And I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff. And so, but I've never been a fan of. I've never really read their articles, anyways. So it's not like they lost me as a customer. Like I wasn't going to go to the conference this year over it though. I just didn't want to support them. But
backed out of the conference. I mean, he was going to be a speaker, and then he backed out.
yeah, I saw that
They were promoting, and
yeah, this might be my last year. We'll kind of see. It kind of depends on what happens. And the reason I went this year is there's just so many folks I know attending, and there's just so many events. It's kind of hard to ignore. It's a big thing, and not a fan of what they're doing over there, but they are certainly helping Bitcoin.
yeah, they've done so much for the space. And I mean, early on too, it was just like great stuff, and sponsoring people, putting convention stuff together, providing financial support to up and comers with books or the little hodler and all that stuff. And at the same time, as a magazine, I think it's the nature of magazines where they, for readership or for drama, it'll be like 10 great tips to improve your sex, or just magazines do that where they'll just throw out like this, lose 30 pounds in 2 days using this whatever method. And I mean, that's like magazines do that kind of shit. At the same time, they have owners of the magazine who are invested in and probably making money off rug pull ordinal type crap.
Yeah.
And that's where it crosses a line for me. Like, no, you're not just, hey, this will get a headline, or maybe somebody will like get attention on the magazine. It's, you're kind of invested in this too. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's if they're involved in a little bit of things that seem scammy, it's hard to ignore that.
Yeah, it's really hard to ignore. I don't know, I really enjoyed Bitcoin Miami. I thought it was pretty fun, right? And I guess at that point in time, I wasn't really embroiled in the Bitcoin drama. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's shocking to me how much Bitcoin drama occurs. I mean, there's just so many people that are just so pissy about every goddamn little thing. But it kind of reminds me of like a libertarian convention. Like, you can go there and there's like a unified sort of purpose, and then everyone's just fucking bickering constantly about every little detail about it. So I don't know. It's
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm not on Twitter, so I think I avoid a lot of it. I am just not aware. I'm on Nostr, and it seems more positive, but
Yeah, Nostr's got a different feedback loop, and with no algorithm, discovery of stuff is different. It's a different universe, but I do like Nostr. When what sort of started orange pilling for me, like literally a couple of decades ago, were books like Creature from Jekyll Island or Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and before Bitcoin was made, or before I'd even heard of it years later. Concepts around broken money and the corruption, criminality of government and banks, I was just really on track with and angry about. And it kind of started me down the kind of a libertarian path, where libertarian just, we got to keep things local and grassroots and for the people. And it's a mindset that I think you can get trapped in that can be kind of negative, where it's a broken system and you get kind of negative. Like you have a negative mindset. Bitcoin shifted that for me, where suddenly there was this hope and future and fix to it all. And yet every once in a while I have these old habits in my head that gravitate to like sort of a negative downer look about systemic stuff.
Yeah.
And I have to like overcome that. And I don't want to like just ignore that or forget that, because it's like ignoring, like, there's problems in the world. So we want to fix them. Now Bitcoin's the fix, and I don't want to just be Pollyanna, like, oh, it'll just fix everything someday just because, and I don't even know. However, even as I believe that as well, there's like, for me, there's been a melding of the two where I remain mindful of criminal governments and criminal systems and the nature of things, as well as this hope and growing community of Bitcoin fixes, and just maintain both together, but with a sense of optimism that it's slowly fixing things. And I see it everywhere all the time.
Yeah, I like the idea that Bitcoin is a hard money that systems can potentially build on, right? Like we had systems built on the gold standard where in theory everything's backed by gold and there's some sort of perceived constraint, right, on how much money exists and the spending of that money, right? But obviously it got out of control, and the qualities of gold led to the fiat world, and now we're in a fiat system where there's just debasement and inflation and unlimited money essentially to spend. It's just how fast are we spending and creating this money is the question, not any other question. Not should we slow this down or go backwards or whatever, right? It's just constant money creation, spending, and it's like playing a game of Monopoly, and there's just extra Monopoly money just entering the game from all over the place. But only like a few people are getting access to it first, right?
Right.
And it's just like, this is not sustainable whatsoever. Like if you go to that Debt Clock website,
Oh yeah.
or if you look at Thomas Massey, he has that lapel pin. I don't know if you've seen that.
Debt Clock.
That's the debt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you look at that and you're like, man, this is not sustainable, right? And I think I'd be interested if anyone thought it was sustainable, hearing their view on that. But if it's not sustainable, it's like, well, has to be some sort of replacement. And so I like the idea of Bitcoin being a potential system that we can build on and use. And you could still, like, I was kind of thinking about this the other day, you could still have banks being built on a Bitcoin standard, right? And they're going to have Bitcoin as their reserve. And they could still do some shenanigans, right? Like if they're minting eCash tokens or something like that, right? Or whatever they're disseminating to their users, it might not actually be Bitcoin, right? They're just backed by Bitcoin. Like there is like cool elements where you can they could prove their reserves, right? They can like digitally sign and prove that they have reserves that would build some confidence and faith in them. Because like we don't really have that right now.
Right.
And there's not really a point in auditing it right now, right? It's just inflating. Yeah. So it's just going to change like the next day. But I do like that idea. There is some strength to that, I think, like being able to audit, being able to, and then with it all digital, it is kind of neat, the idea of being able to create like your own bank if you really wanted to for your community or your family. I don't know if you guys have played around at all with like the Federation mints or the eCash mints or anything like that, but that's kind of how I see those where things are going potentially, is you have banks that are utilizing Bitcoin and issuing some sort of token. I don't think they're going to actually issue Bitcoin. Like I think that they'll try to fractional reserve, right? They'll try to do this kind of stuff,
right?
Yeah,
and I think they could still pull it off, but it'd be harder to, I think.
Oh, way harder. Yeah.
You could audit it potentially, or you could.
Jekyll Island, that actually made an appearance in my book now. And if you look at the history of the Federal Reserve and you look at sort of what they were dealing with at the time, and then you sort of compare it to the narrative that's in Creature from Jekyll Island, it starts poking some holes into this idea of this like master plan of these elite bankers that are secreting away and coming up with this scheme to steal money from everybody. But if you look at like the political reality on the ground at the time, it's like I think I wrote in the book, like for the guys that founded the Fed, Abraham Lincoln was as far back in their memory as Ronald Reagan is for us, you know. So it wasn't like this sort of thing that had happened a long time ago. It was like, oh yeah, you remember when Reagan got shot? Is sort of the equivalent of that. But they had just come out of the Spanish-American War. There was all this like conversation in Congress, like from the Republicans about, you know, the nature of elastic money and go keep your rubber band money. And they kept talking about getting to a sound money thing. And they had a big problem with like redeeming greenbacks and getting those things out of the economy.
Well, and after the Civil War, they dealt with a lot of states and those Confederate money systems that they were like reining in. Like, no. America has its own one money.
Right.
So.
And there was this whole, like, the whole entire U.S. banking system was built on a unit banking model, where everywhere else in the world they're using a branch banking model, and it works way better. At least they thought it was working way better at the time. But they never fixed any of that shit. They punted on everything. When the Republicans would come in, they'd say, hey, we're going to get back to sound money, and then they would literally do nothing. They would do everything in their power to just avoid that conversation, never touch it, never get back to it, because all their unit banker buddies, all these, like agrarian populist owners of unit banks, which are completely opposite from the old world, like European elite bankers that were in the cities. Those guys were all in conflict, and they all had relatively equal power. So nobody wanted to get on board with anything. They were just like, nope, all we care about is my bank. I want to be sure my bank keeps making a lot of money, and you guys can go fuck yourselves. And they could give a shit about economic stability, the national finances, how they're going to fund shit. And so, like, if you look at the history of the Fed, it's like this really gross, sort of awkward, messed up, nobody wins kind of compromise, trying to stabilize this really, really incredibly unstable, incredibly fragile banking system. And, you know, we ended up with a thing where elite people get to siphon money from everybody. But at the time, I think it would give them way too much credit to say, like, there was like this elite cadre of, you know, secret people with fangs and fucking horns that were coming together and figuring out how to implement world domination. Again, and it came out that way. It ends up being that way, but I don't think that was necessarily like how we got there, you know. So it's like a cause and effect thing. I think is a little.
Well, you'd mentioned before, like Hanlon's razor, where, you know, when given the option between evil intent and just incompetence, not that it's incompetence, it's just people in a situation doing what they think is right for them, and the other's greed or say whatever. But it's easy to look at the totality of everything that happened, like in Creature for Jekyll Island, and it is a straight up, complete, deep conspiracy from the beginning. Right? That might not have been on their minds exactly, but that's kind of how it played out,
right?
Effectively,
exactly. So that's what they ended up with. But I mean, that result is the same result they've had for the last 2,000 years. So you can say, well, they conspired to do this, and I go, well, maybe, or maybe they're just always the guys that are sitting on top of the pole, and maybe they're always the guys that are going, hey, this is a good idea. Somehow it just happens to work out in our favor, but it's a good idea, right? So I don't know, man. It's I'm a big fan of Hanlon's razor.
Well, whatever they pulled off, and whether they're lizard people or goat people, you know, at least we can opt out of their system now. So that's what I've been kind of focusing on lately. So we're building businesses, right? My family, and we plan on accepting Bitcoin and actually advertising in a way. It's like we're actually it's Bitcoin preferred. Actually, I have a little plaque up there that says Bitcoin preferred.
Nice.
And so I'm picturing like coffee shop. You come in, they tell you the price in sats. You know, the local rancher's confused. He has US dollar cash in his hand. The barista looks at him like, "What? Oh, you have that old government money. Interesting. Yeah, we'll still take it, but you know,
reluctantly."
So reluctantly, yeah. We're gonna, and you know, she puts gloves on. You know, she's like, "Oh God, this is disgusting," right?
There we go.
Yeah, and then you know, in the meantime, we'll accept it because we can still convert it right into real money, into Bitcoin. But so it's funny. I like the idea of, because we only go grocery shopping at like a couple stores. You know, there's only so many things we need. I can buy local beef, and I want to try to find folks that will accept payment in Bitcoin. Like if I can operate entirely on Bitcoin, where I just have all my savings in Bitcoin, everything I'm holding is in Bitcoin, and I can't really do that right now, right? Because I have bills that I have to pay in dollars.
Right.
But if I could like get beef or something, and if I could pay my bills in Bitcoin, that'd be cool. And the other day, I don't want to dox him, but I hired a contractor, so a professional. I can't explain what the service is, because it'd be kind of doxing. But it was expensive. It wasn't like a few $100 deal or something, and
Right.
it had to do with a service at this big hotel that I own that I'm remodeling, and it came down to paying him. And I had previously talked to this guy about Bitcoin, and he was already open to the idea. Like he was, kind of a libertarian type guy and liked the idea of money outside the system, And so he wanted to get paid in cash to avoid, reporting presumably. And so I was like, yeah, I can pay you in cash, or I can pay you in Bitcoin, or some ratio, right? And when it came down to paying, I thought he'd take like maybe $100 in Bitcoin. No, he's like, I want half of it in Bitcoin. And I was like, oh shit. And so I ended up paying half the bill in Bitcoin, and I thought that was really neat. It was like the first time I made like a big payment in Bitcoin like that, and the guy went, to his credit, he went full in. I mean, half that is a lot, and I didn't do it on Lightning. I did it on the real network, which is great because the main network, it just works. Like it's a little slower, but it's cool. And I actually used it as an opportunity to talk to the guy. Like, all right, so I just broadcasted the transaction. Here it is. Here's the link to the mempool. Here you can see it's unconfirmed, right? So it's like I'm explaining what's physically occurring, like it's going around the world in data, and it's being processed and analyzed and verified that it's not double spent, and then some miner will throw it into a block, and then sure enough, right, within I paid a high fee to expedite this.
Oh, did you really?
And then within 10 minutes, boom, it's on a block, and I can talk to them about blocks, and we need to wait for more blocks. That way, like it was really included, and I didn't like go spend that somewhere else at the same time, So it was a cool opportunity to orange bill someone.
Oh, that's
explain
awesome.
it. And
yeah, I paid for my tattoo.
you did?
Yeah, like this tattoo right here, got paid for in Bitcoin.
Oh, that's awesome.
Talking to the guy, and he was asking for cash, and I'm cash poor always, right? Like it's either I'm just a middleman. It's either between me and my Bitcoin, or between me and the creditors, right? So, but he said, yeah, the tattoo is going to cost like $300 or whatever it was, and I was like, well, I kind of don't have the cash, but he had an appointment open up. I was like, you wouldn't take Bitcoin, would you? And he's like, oh yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And the funny thing is we never even talked about like price volatility, right? Like, and at the time, I think Bitcoin was like 72 grand or something. So, and then it kind of dumped a little bit. But at the moment of the transaction, it was the sum that we had agreed upon. And without talking about it, without discussing it, it was just sort of implied somehow that he went, okay, well, when you send it to me, that's how much I was asking for. And he kind of left it at that because it did go down. I mean, I think the impact on his bottom line was $10 or something. I don't think it was a big deal, but
if he's cashing out or whatever.
Yeah, if he were.
Yeah.
But he was pretty cool about it. Unfortunately, he was also like, I also take Ethereum. I'm like,
yeah. So you'll never go back there again.
I'll pay you in Ethereum.
Yeah. It is kind of harder when your unit of count is dollar still, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But what are you going to do? It's so volatile. That reminds me though, I'm selling a truck right now, and I was asking for like 12 grand for it. And so I had 12 grand written on the window, and then I put like or point whatever, it was like 0.425 Bitcoin at the time, right? And it was actually a discount. It was like maybe $11,500 worth of Bitcoin at the time, right? So because that would save me, like if you gave me a bunch of cash, it's kind of a tedious to turn that into Bitcoin, right? For me, there's going to be some fees, some extra steps, use of my time. So if you just like, probably not $500 worth, but if you just send me Bitcoin. That's cooler. I like it. It's a little faster for me. And no one bought the truck at the time, right? It's still for sale for everyone out there listening. But like 6 months, like something like 6 months went by, and I went back out there and I looked at the sheet, and you could say like $12,000 is probably has less purchasing power after 6 months, but it's kind of hard to tell. But the Bitcoin, it like tripled. So I was basically asking for like 12 grand or
36.
yeah, it was like 30 some $1,000 in Bitcoin. It like just doesn't make any sense. So it was just kind of funny. And I actually used that as an example because a few people around me knew I'd done that. And I was like, look at this, like, look at what gained more value over a period of, and it might have been like a year. I can't remember if it was 6 months or a year or whatever, but it was kind of a cool way to try to orange pill people again, because it's just like in their face. It's like,
Yeah.
if I would have been paid,
Yeah.
like look at my purchasing power increase over time. It's cool.
Exactly. Yeah. The libertarian track for me is something that you taught me a lot about. And it's funny because years ago, Michael Malice, there was a graphic novel written about Michael Malice, written by Harvey Carr, who's written a lot of the American Splendor comics and all that stuff. And he had ran into Michael Malice in New York City. Harvey had been on like the David Letterman show and was just kind of a funny character, and was told about Michael Malice, like, you got to meet this guy. So he met Michael Malice, and you know how Malice is, where he just ran on about his life story and his politics and his views on the world. And so Harvey wrote a whole book on him that was a graphic novel. It's called Ego and Hubris, because Michael kind of exudes some of that, although he owns it. But so I'd read that, and I was like, this is a really interesting guy, and the take on libertarian type politics that I construed from it at the time. And then I forgot about it. And now with Malice's podcasts and interviews, and he's like everywhere these days, and he's more overtly straight up anarchy, like promoting his education on what anarchy means to him. And so then there's this juxtaposition of people's impressions of, they hear the term anarchism and it's chaos.
No rules.
No. There's a lot of just normal human things we do every day that are not like centrally controlled or dictated, and there's not rules about it. We just do it, and it's because we're, humans in a community that know how to get along, and it's anarchy. It's just, we're just doing that.
You might actually have more authoritarianism, small scale authoritarianism under anarchy, right? Like if you had a full anarchist system. And actually, a good example of this would be like, if you guys come over to my home, if I go over to your home, you're probably going to dictate what I'm wearing. Like, there's probably going to be some rules on my attire. So if I come in naked, you might actually use force against me to remove me from the property. Or what I say. Like if I start saying, crazy stuff or offensive stuff, and you have kids around or something, like you might have all sorts of strict rules that don't exist outside your home, but you absolutely expect and enforce them inside your home. So those are like some examples. But hopefully the idea is that if anyone's visiting your home, they're agreeing to those rules, right, and complying. And if they don't want to, they can leave. But
yeah, his anarchy is like it's very social. It's social in nature. It's not edicts and rules. It's just we operate naturally in these ways already. I mean, there's plenty of social constructs around that, but we enforce them just ourselves because we get along naturally. So,
that's true up until you get to the margins, right? And then at the margins is where all the rules come from, But it's like, it's the same thing like we were talking about last week. If you got together with your buddies and said, hey, let's play football, and we go, let's just throw the rule book out, if there was a valuable enough prize at the end of that game, hey, the winner of this game gets $1 billion. I mean, those guys, there's going to be dead people on the field, right? With no. But the thing is like when friends play, they make a lot of allowances for the social contract, right? Like they go, you won't see a bunch of adult men arguing about like, hey man, you didn't grab that flag. You're not supposed to grab me. You grab my shirt. They'll generally just kind of let those little borderline rule violations slide. But the higher up the hierarchy you go, when you get to the NFL, like every
if the stakes are higher,
super important, right?
Yeah.
So depending on the nature of the competition, like those rule sets become complex for a reason because you're competing, you know. Whereas if you're working truly cooperatively, like people just, hey, let's put the barn up. Like people, you don't need a lot of rules for, you know, how you're going to behave yourselves because you're all sort of in that social glue. But when someone starts fucking up is when you start, oh, you're not allowed to hit my kid on the head with a hammer because he pissed you off, dude. Like that, you know, when you start violating those social norms. But then the problem you run into is like, what's a social norm and how does that get enforced? When people are cooperating, that tends to be pretty smooth. When they're in competition, and especially when they're in competition for some resource, some prize, then all of a sudden all this shit gets really complicated. So
that's where I see that people struggle with concepts of like anarchy because all of their knowledge about what incentives are very fiat. Or like, I mean, a game is so fiat.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is this huge construct and care over a game that you might play for enjoyment or for fitness or for fun? And we've made it this fiat thing. So the incentives are all burdened and whacked out. So then you have to have all these crazy rules because it's so fiat. Whereas in a natural dynamic system, it's not so fiat. And that, like Sailor's last talk that he had with Fred.
Yeah, that was great, wasn't it?
He went into a point where we all really, as humans, we should maybe all just slow down and not. I mean, what he's saying is effectively, don't be so fiat. We have these expectations of like service and time and focused microscopic attention on calamity and things. And he mentioned Hurricane Irma as being this Twitter king thing that evolved and blew up like COVID did and other issues that like the media needs these things to focus on and make a story out of. And it's also fiat. And he said, if we all just took a breath and slowed down and took care of each other, the incentives are different.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where without the fiat incentives, maybe we don't need all those marginal edge case microscopic rule stuff.
Right. I agree, man. I mean, I kind of look at the world and think it's pretty remarkable where we managed to get where we're at already. Like, this is a pretty incredible world we've created based on a thing that's like, hey, if I conk you on the head, I get to take your stuff. Like, that's the root of this whole game. And somehow or another, through, you know, the last 1,000 years, we've managed to refine that to like, well, you're only allowed to conk someone on the head under these conditions, but you have to meet this, and there's this and this and this, and you have to be this person, and it's only under these conditions. And if you push it too far, then we have this penalty, and yada, yada, yada. But somehow or another, they managed to iron this little game out, so it's relatively stable. The only underlying rule that screws it all up is the one that's the variable rule, which is the resource to capture, which is the money, right? And so I keep looking at Bitcoin as like, oh, well, that's the rule you can't break. So if you put at the bottom of football a rule that can't be broken, like the core thing of the game, there is no possible way to cheat getting over the end zone line. There's no possible way to cheat getting your football between the goalposts. Like every step you have to take has to follow this rule, or else you just don't get to play. And you kind of go, well, I think the everything that springs forth from that changes dramatically. You know,
the incentives are all different.
Yeah, well, it makes you focus on things that are going to help you adhere to the core rule set, which is there's only 21 million. You have to do this to get it. This has to be verified by this. And there's no way to cheat it. You can't just go, well, I just want to have 2 Bitcoin today because by executive fiat, we've decided that we need to go fight a war or something, you know?
Yeah, it's the way I look at that is like historically we've had, you know, people manage ledgers and manage the issuance, right? And manage the whole system. Like it's all people. And you can have like really good righteous people that, you know, you can trust them, but then they die and then the next person is like horrible or whatever, right? And you just it involves trust and reliance on humans, and humans are,
Terrible.
they're fallen, and they're subject to corruption.
Yeah.
And maybe that corruption, it looks like sometimes the corruption's easier to notice in time, and maybe the intention at the time was, righteous, or they thought it was righteous. But what I like about the Bitcoin network is we try to eliminate humans from it. So it's really just math that's enforcing the rules, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree, man. Like it's
Yeah.
the most astonishing invention ever created by man.
Yeah.
You
Well,
have
and it's
immutable ledger, right?
it's hard to seize it, right? Like if you hold your private keys and you hold them somewhere, right? There's like better ways to hold them than other ways. It becomes really difficult to seize it, right?
Yeah.
And potentially impossible. Like, and so bonking someone on the head to get their Bitcoin it's just a lot more expensive or impossible now.
Right.
So it's nice. So really the resource competition is going to have to focus on the things that aren't digital entirely, right? It's going to be your home, your other things like that.
Competition for the resources into something that requires contribution rather than theft. Because right now the easiest thing in the world is to steal. Like if the equivalent in the football terms is like if you just made it legal to kick someone in the nuts, you go, well, everyone's going to be kicking you in the nuts. And the biggest guy that kicks you the hardest.
When I'll be on the sideline selling those cups, and I'll be making a lot of money, a lot of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
The free market will solve it.
Yeah.
So what I've noticed lately is, because I'm involved like local politics, is that there's a lot of like focus. It seems like when people, even around here, they're forced with like they're presented with a problem, and it might be some sort of societal problem, or kids are hungry or something like that, right? And their go-to is the government needs to solve it. And I see that even with all the Republicans around here, it seems like. And I just that's not where my mind goes. My mind defaults to private solutions to everything. And so we just started a program. I think it's like 2 or 3 weeks now in Sherman County, where if you're a child in Sherman County, or rather if you're a parent with children in Sherman County, you can sign up for free, and it's all administered and managed by volunteers. And you sign up, and it's free for you. And every Monday we coordinate with you, and we give you food for your kids for that whole week. It's the lunches that are covered, right? So if you have one kid, on Monday you pick up 7 lunches, and it's like good food. It's all bought from the grocery store that weekend prior, and it's all prepared. It's like good, healthy food, right? And it's all privately funded. So it's about $25 per kid per week is what it's mathing out to right now. And then if people want to, so people are opting into it, right? Because you just sign up. You're not forced to, right? And there's no like check on if you can, if you qualify. Other than we're in a local community where we just know everyone, right? So it's like, well, we know they live in Sherman County, right? So there's some of that going on, but and it's all confidential, right? It's not like you're broadcasted or anything on social media or whatever. And then if you want to volunteer, you're obviously volunteering, so no one's forcing you to do that. And then if you're wanting to fund it, right? So we accept donations. We actually accepted $150 worth of Bitcoin already for this program from 2 different people. So it's kind of cool to see that. And so we have all the private funding, obviously you're opting into that. And we're not like organized as a nonprofit or anything. So there's no like tax incentives, or we're completely out of the system. Like that's what we're trying to do, right? So we're like, it'd be easy to form as a nonprofit, but then you have all these rules and reporting requirements, and it's just like we don't care about any of that. We're not going to play your games. We're just going to feed hungry kids, and if you don't like it, what are you going to do about it, right? Like, and so it's been successful so far. I think we have like I don't know how many kids we're up to right now, but the last week I participated in, there was 8 kids that we're feeding, so it's kind of cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, in my line of work, I mean, there's just such a chunk of revenue that I rely on that's effectively grant money. I mean, it's all taxes ultimately, but it's like there's always another grant. There's always another grant, and on the more on the left side of politics, it's just like this is all good. The more, the merrier. We need more of this. And on the conservative side, business-minded, oriented sense of politics on some of this stuff, there's like this criticism of the system or the nature of the sustainability of that business. And yet, when there's free money, it's almost often not even a thought like, well, take that money, get the money, go for the money.
Yeah, totally.
And
Yeah, they're all playing it with the same system, and
The source.
the source of it all, or what that is. And so, like Democrats, Republicans, whatever, it's like, well, take that money, get that money, go for the money, and it's just it always comes with strings attached. Ultimately, there's
yeah,
just data and reports, or well, no, you got to, you're going to use our equipment or our systems, or you're going to have to. Everyone has to get this training. Everyone has to get an account here and track stuff.
or you have to buy our insurance, like with FEMA,
Yeah,
flood.
So that's just I can't escape that. To right now to sustain.
Yeah,
I have to do that. On the Libertarian Party side of things, it'd be like, well, how do we do things like what you're talking about that are, I guess in a lot of ways it would have to be grassroots to start and trickle up and become,
Yeah, you have to pick I'm trying to opt out of as many things as I can, and a lot of it we can just do ourselves. Now, I'm not going to create like a prison cell and incarcerate people. Right, that's not on my radar to do. And I don't know how to solve that problem. But if I'm a victim of like some sort of crime on my private property, though, I mean, there's probably going to be a bunch of violence involved, right? Like, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know, because we're like with the criminal justice system, it's just such a huge system, and there's so many. Like, where do you even tackle that beast? Like, should we be even incarcerating as many people as we are?
Absolutely.
Or and there, because we all know a lot of people that should probably be locked up or executed. I don't know. I don't know where you guys are on that kind of stuff, but then you can see all sorts of examples of people of where that just doesn't help, right? Or that's so expensive, or it's so like questionably moral. Like and a lot of times it boils down to like a lot of times like I just disagree with other people on did a crime even occur. Like Ross Ulbricht is serving 2 life sentences and 40 years for creating a website and facilitating like a free market of drugs and stuff like that, right? I wouldn't even like nowadays, I wouldn't even be like, I don't think that's a crime, right? But there's certainly going to be people that disagree with me, right? And so, but then there's people like me that, if you're like trying to target children to meet with them online, I like the idea of like there's undercover cops out there posing as children and catching these guys, even though technically like they might not have technically talked with a real child yet. Like they're just chatting with an adult, right? And they haven't like who's the victim in that other than the state, right?
Right.
So it's really complicated. That whole criminal justice system gets really, really complicated really fast because you can think of all sorts of reasons why you'd want that. You can think of you can see all sorts of examples of it failing.
Yeah.
And I do like the idea of, because I obviously used to work in law enforcement, I do like the idea of having alternative. I like the idea of privatizing law enforcement to some extent, and there are some examples of it. I don't know a lot about it though. Like there was railroad police and stuff like that, but I like the idea of like elements of law enforcement being privatized, and it does kind of exist like with private investigators and stuff like that. Anytime you have like a trial, you're going to have like defense expert witnesses that are probably not law enforcement, but they probably worked in that field somehow, right? And they're going to be kind of used as counter experts to whatever the investigative methods or evidence gathering was used. And so you do have like an industry out there of like private investigation work. And I like the idea of that because I think a lot of times cops are just not very good at investigating. And there's a lack of like follow through, especially on like fraud and cryptocurrency cases. Like that was kind of what I worked in. And I was kind of like disappointed in overall in law enforcement response in that realm. And a lot of it, if your customers are the tax base, the people, the civilians, and they're not getting like a service that they're paying for, and they don't really have any alternative, right? I like the idea of having like private alternatives that can be kind of held accountable, like you would hold your utility company accountable, or Amazon, or whatever service you might be using. But they might not necessarily have the ability to like, go use force with immunity or kidnap people and lock them into cells, right? So it's a pretty complicated matter, and I definitely have lots of thoughts on it. Like, what can we privatize? What can we? Because we do monopolize it. Even private investigation stuff is sort of the government's really involved in that too, with licensing and regulations. And you can kind of get away with it just being online, because a lot of the like fraud investigations are just like online. Like, you don't have to physically go anywhere. Like, could I work a cryptocurrency theft case out of New Mexico? I've never even been to New Mexico. Like, I certainly don't have a fucking private investigator license there, right? I could probably look at some spreadsheets and do some tracing, right? But is that illegal in New Mexico? Maybe, I don't know. I have actually been to New Mexico, but I'm not licensed there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with you. Like, and part of the problem I think we run into with law enforcement, like if you look at the European model, they actually put more people in prison than we do, but they just don't hold them as long.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Growing into the idea that like it's sometimes helpful to interrupt people that are spiraling, like they just keep doing dumb shit and they're committing fraud at work or whatever it is. And I've met people like that when I worked in the prison. Like this lady, I think she worked for the Yamhill County Sheriff's Department or something like that, and she was committing fraud. But she started off with like, well, because she was in charge of the books, and she just said, hey, I'm just a little short this week. I'm just going to take $100. Rinse and repeat for 4 or 5 years, and she got up to like 80 grand, and she just kept spiraling down.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is, you look at a lady like that and you go, all right, you probably need a little interrupt here. Like, you're taken from the public coffers. And she was a real nice lady. She just got tangled up in shit and just kept.
Yeah. She got greedy.
How people get in that spiral, right? But if you put her in prison for like 6 months, she figures it out real quick. She goes, yep, screwed up. That's not going to happen again. We're done. But she was doing like 5 years. And you go, well, that's 4 times the cost of what she stole to hold her in prison. Like, why are we doing it? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's like she put a burden on society, and then we're burdening society even further by holding her in prison for 300 grand. So
if you had her released to work and then start paying restitution and pay taxes, you're getting something back out of it already.
And there was zero chance. Like, if you met this lady in person, you go, there's zero chance she's ever going to do this.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
and there's it's I forgot what I was going to say.
I remember.
Oh, a lot of libertarian like philosophers will talk about like the idea of it seems like they rely a lot on restitution, the idea of like monetary compensation of victims, because we do probably have a tendency of like locking people up, and then the victims like don't really get much out of it.
Right.
But I don't know how many criminals I've met that are just dirt poor, right? It's like, yeah, good luck collecting on that, right? But I don't know. I just watched some videos of I won't mention that video, but basically sometimes you deal with thieves with violence, right? Just like in the moment, like they're being branded and beaten. Maybe that's good enough. I don't know. And then, but one thing that's concerning is like when private property owners are not able to protect their private property, that's pretty concerning. Or when the law enforcement or the government gets in the way of probably what should naturally happen. or they're just part of the problem outright, like with the school shooting in Texas. What was that? The one where there was like some 300 officers there and they failed to go in and engage with the active shooter. I forget the name of it.
That guy got his head shit on for that little stunt, but
yeah, I just read that they indicted the former chief, on a bunch of felonies, like endangering the welfare of children or something like that. But I actually I think the individual cops should be held accountable for that. I remember seeing videos of the hallways where there's shooting and cops pausing and like taking cover and backing away from it. Like all those guys should be punished severely for that. Right. I think like if you're volunteering to be in law enforcement, you should be volunteering and eager to get into the fight, in my opinion. And a lot of them are. Like I used to work as a cop. Like a lot of them are like that. They had that mentality of like, if there's like a shooting or something exciting happening,
Yeah,
they're not like driving the opposite way. Like they're all going. There might even be violating policy to like get there because it's
right,
technically like too far away.
right.
But they're all going there, right? Because they all want to get into it, and they
Yeah.
want to get. It's exciting, right? It's part of the action, and so this idea of being reluctant to engage an active shooter, just like, and then not only do they not engage, then they prevent parents from engaging. It's like, dude, I told my wife, if that happened here, I don't think it would happen here. We have good deputies here, but I expect you to ride through them, like drive our Suburban into that school, take some action.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it gets tricky with all that stuff too, because you get some guy that charges in there, and all of a sudden you got another casualty you got to deal with, or he starts screwing up, or he starts shooting kids, or God knows what. I mean, like it ends up to be, it can be kind of a mess. And I've had a similar experience with cops in general, where you'll have guys that are like, they hear shooting call and they're literally diving through the window, like they cannot get there quick enough. And there's other guys that are sitting there going like, well, I am halfway through my donut, so I could just keep eating my donut for a little while. There's going to be plenty of people there. Like, I've been doing this 25 years. I don't need to get my ass shot off just because maybe some guy's running around with a gun. I don't know. And the trouble you run into is like those hard chargers, oftentimes they just get bored, right? So they start creating shit where it's just like, hey, we're getting in the action. They'll make action,
Mm-hmm.
And I used to see like guys like that in the prison, and a lot of them are young and they're just sort of full of piss and whatever, and they just, man, I was hoping this would be more action. I'm like, you don't want action, dude. Like, that's the last thing in the world you want, because we're concrete and steel, and it sucks ass when you hit your head on it.
Yeah, you see that in the military too. I mean, it's
Right.
just kind of in men, a lot of men, like a lot of them, a lot of us like grew up watching war movies and kind of growing up with that warrior mentality, warrior spirit, like this idea. Like we don't really talk about a lot, but I remember a lot of soldiers just wanted to get into a fight. They just wanted to go and get in a war. And I think that's common throughout history.
Yeah,
There's a lot of common, like popular sayings about that, right? It's like young men are eager to get into that kind of stuff. And I was in combat in Afghanistan. It was fun. Like I remember having a shit ton of adrenaline, and time would we'd all be really confused on how much time elapsed afterwards. We had to always rely on sometimes like we'd have radio systems that when you key, it'll like do a date time stamp recording, and we'd have to rely on that just to figure out how long we were at places, because we'd be like, oh, we're there for like a half hour, and it'd be like, no, you're there for 4 hours. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So we didn't really have too many guys get hurt, but so it could have been worse, experience wise. But I know a lot of soldiers that even have PTSD that are like, they still remember like the excitement of some of that, right? Even though it's terrible, but it's like, yeah, it's terrible, but it's also like the best adrenaline rush you'll ever get, and it's still fucked up. You probably still shouldn't do it, but it can be kind of fun. I mean, that's why we watch like fights, right? Like conflict, violence, like that's just something that, for better or for worse, a lot of people are attracted to.
Did you find your transition from the military back to like in the States hard? Or you're part of a Bitcoin Veterans group, and you weren't like in regular combat. There's this hypervigilance day after day that sort of chips at you. And I mean, you went into the law enforcement after that, so it was
I went into law enforcement after, but I still have hypervigilance and stuff, and I've had to go through some therapy and stuff. But the problem areas I had was with IED threats. So I had like I operated in a very high IED area, and we're constantly like on guard with IEDs. We'd find them all the time, and they would, where I was in Afghanistan, they would put IEDs under the what are they called? They're those like sewers under the road. I can't remember the name. Culverts. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there, any kind of like culverts, like I would be like nervous about. Like I wouldn't like slam on my brakes or anything, but if I'm like driving by them, I would be like kind of panicky.
Right.
And And that's stupid. I'd be like in the middle of Sherman County, all panicked over a fucking culvert, right? And so there's like weird little things like that because you're used to perceiving things as threats, right? And I remember like up in Washington where I was a cop first, there was like some wire sticking out of some snow once, and I actually stopped my patrol car in front of that one, and I was just like, and then I immediately was like, what am I doing? And I just continued driving. But like your body, like sometimes your body will react without your mind, like before your mind really is catching up to what you're processing, right? It's kind of a weird thing, and it's a good thing because it adds to your survivability in certain situations. But that's kind of what happens is you want to react. You're trained to react a certain way, and then you just start reacting that way. And there's obviously like way worse PTSD scenarios and situations that you've seen people in. Sometimes it gets worse when they drink and stuff. But yeah, so those are some of the things I had to deal with, but they're kind of minor. But I did have to like go through therapy on it and shit.
Oh, for sure.
Oh boy. At Nashville, is that where Bitcoin Veterans? Are you giving a talk for that? You have a breakout?
So Bitcoin Veterans has a Bitcoin Veterans Citadel area of the conference. It's like just a big giant room, is my understanding, and there's like a stage in there. There'll be some workshop area, like tables and chairs set up, and I think we'll have a projector, TV screen, stuff like that. And so there'll be workshops over a 2-day period, like on mesh radio networks and a bunch of other stuff, eCash 101. And then I'll be doing one workshop, I think on the second day. It's going to be an hour long. It'll just be very basic how to on-chain surveillance yourself. So I'm basically going to go into like, this is how like an investigator or law enforcement may trace your transactions on the chain. And so these are like the heuristics that are used, the assumptions that are made. And so if you wanted to be private, like with your on-chain transactions, these are just like the considerations you should have. Here are some tips and techniques you could consider using, and to give yourself some privacy. And it's gonna be pretty basic because I don't really have that much time. And then we're gonna try to do like maybe 20-25 minutes of Q&A afterwards. And so it'll probably be kind of boring, honestly, if you're already aware of like on-chain privacy issues. But I don't think I'll have time to really get into super in-depth stuff. Like you could do a whole hour-long presentation just on what mixing is, or coordinated spending, like how all that works. We'll kind of cover it a little bit, but
are you gonna record that?
I don't know. We might be able to, but even if I don't record it, what I would like to do someday is make really short videos, maybe like 5 minutes on each heuristic, and like really have a well-produced, like narrated explanation of everything I go over, but in depth, and have them like really short, like 5-minute videos, and just have a series of them. And I don't know, like, I don't know how I'll contribute, what I'll contribute these videos to. Like maybe it'll be Satoshi's Militia or something. I don't know, but it'll just be like, I don't know where we would put them, but I just want to create these things and then just have them exist out there in the world. And I think that would be the most effective thing to do, as opposed to just like this 1 hour long.
To watch videos like that for sure.
That's one thing about Matthew Cratter's videos, is because they'll be anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. And
I really like his.
Like I know this topic, or I know how to do that, or I'm already aware. But I'll listen to them, and they're educational for me, and it reminds me of stuff. And also he'll cover it very comprehensively so that I learn from it.
Yeah.
And he is prolific. He does videos like every dang day, I think, almost. But they're short and sweet and educational, or sometimes it's just nipping little FUD in the butt, or kind of news and stuff that happened, but they're quick and short. I like that style where I can learn, but I'm not committed to a long, lengthy talk around things all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he has like his niche, right? Because there's a ton of long form content. Like there's too much. I can't catch up.
Yeah, we're doing it right now.
Yeah, but we need more Bitcoin podcasts though, so we need to keep this up.
We're contributing. We're doing our part. And
absolutely.
Anything you make, I'm happy to incorporate into my stuff or just reshare it, because it's very compatible. I like that stuff, and hey, it's the Militia brand fits, maybe. We're a militia.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of I was just talking to a deputy on July 4th about some of the stuff I have coming up because I'm also presenting at a financial crime conference, the financial crime conference, about like analysis, and I'm actually the most exciting presentation I have for them is an hour and a half long on just the Bitcoin network, and so I'm really looking forward to that, and it's just like basics. It's just like I mean, it's going to be basics, but it's going to be like way more in depth than anything they've been exposed to, guaranteed.
Is this a
And
FinCEN thing? Like, is it a FinCEN conference or something?
it's organized, I think, officially. Like the main organizer is the Oregon Department of Justice, actually. But then there's a bunch of state and federal and private, like banking industry and insurance. So there's like if you have fraud investigators in your industry, they're probably going to this conference, and so there'll be hundreds of people. And I actually attended it once, and I wasn't really impressed with. I won't dox them, but I wasn't impressed really with the presentations on cryptocurrencies. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, get me in there. Let's talk about Bitcoin, and I'll touch on the other shit. But they're not going to be. I'm going to give it to them real, right? I'm going to talk to them about how this is very different from Bitcoin and how it's not. It's probably a security. You guys should get on that. No,
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's good to like start with Bitcoin because it is more basic and simpler to understand than the other ones typically. Because if you're talking about the Ethereum network, it can kind of it's more simple in certain ways because it's proof of stake and you have account. It's all account based. So you don't you can reuse your addresses, your account address, and it's just a balance being credited and debited, right? So it's more akin to their Wells Fargo checking account, right? It's kind of easier to perceive and conceptualize what's going on. You have a balance going up and down. Whereas with Bitcoin, you got to talk to them about UTXOs, and now you're immediately into acronyms, right? And nerdy sounding stuff, and then. But on the other side, with Ethereum, most of the activity is with smart contracts, right? So then you have to start talking about smart contracts. It's like way more complicated.
Oh yeah.
Because then you get into all these different tokens built on top of the network, and that's probably what they're. I mean, most of like crime is, I think, is a lot of it's starting in Bitcoin, but it ends up in the shitcoin world, right? They're moving the money usually through the shitcoin world. In my old experience, anyways, that's what was happening.
Like the on-chain fraud that goes on in the shitcoin world. I mean, it can be straight up just from the founders, right? And then when you get into like the bridge hacks and like the way people move stuff around and the mixing services and all that kind of stuff, like it can get squirrely over there just by design, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Like there's the exploit aspect where there's just so much code and so much new enterprising things that if someone manipulates or exploits something, and I think those are kind of fun arguments to hear. Like if you find an exploit in the code and you end up with a bunch of funds, that some people would look at that and be like, you're stealing. It's like, technically,
well, that's
like if code is law, right?
Yeah.
Like this idea, there is an argument, I think. But good luck. Like I think I don't think, like if you're at the point where you're arrested and going through a court process in the United States, that probably won't suffice. I'm just guessing, but
well, maybe. Like I agree with you because like if someone writes a piece of code and they go, I intend the code to make it so this guy can transfer this under this condition, and I failed to account for the way I wrote that logic. The logic also says this guy can transfer this way. And so following that guy's logic, it's not that guy's fault that your logic sucks.
Right.
And so if you're trying to convert like human speak into human code and you fuck that up, exploiting that, I don't think it's an exploit. I think it's just following the logic. It's just logic that programmer didn't.
Yeah, I like the argument. If I was the other side, I would try to be like, listen, our intent needs to be accounted for this. Like, I intended to lock my front door, I forgot it's wide open, and
Yeah.
you walked in, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever, right?
That's
I would, yeah, it's a fun thing to think about. I don't have to worry about that because I just
course.
deal with Bitcoin. But even in Bitcoin world though, you do have like anytime you're custodying Bitcoin and you're like a business or a service, like you'll have code that's outside of Bitcoin that could be
Right.
definitely hacked, right? And you
Sure.
could potentially get screwed. But it's an interesting topic for sure. I'm
Well,
glad I don't have to deal with shitcoin stuff as much.
little OJD thing, man. Like, maybe I'll go down. When is that?
You kind of cut out. What was that?
When is that OJD talk?
OJD, and what is that?
OJD, Oregon Justice Department.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So that's a conference in September. I can send you their website. I forget it off the top of my head, but yeah, you might like it, especially since I'm going to be there. Like the first half of the first day is just me talking.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's fun. I like doing that, and it's we'll have some humor in it.
Are you there for Swan?
No, not officially. They're allowing me to do it. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, because it is. I think it's beneficial to talk to because there's a lot of regulators and investigators and banking partners, banking people in general. I mean, in that audience, right? And I can talk their talk. I can be like, hey, I think we should go after thieves and scammers and protect private property rights and hold people accountable and talk about justice, right? And they're going to be like, yeah, they're going to nod along and be like, but what's like effective? What's actually useful? What's a bunch of just show? What's the real intent behind some of the stuff we're doing? Like,
Right.
Should we really jeopardize our entire financial survey or our financial privacy in order to not catch most of the people?
Right.
Like, that's not a good sell to me. It's kind of like we need to put cameras in all our living rooms because we're going to, catch a certain amount of more burglars every year. It's like, that's probably true, but like,
right.
well, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't worry about it. It's like, it's not really going to work for me.
Yeah.
Or you implement all this surveillance and control mechanisms, and then you manage to catch maybe just enough, one guy, and you hold that up. See, we got this one.
When you do catch people, like a lot of privacy advocates, in my opinion, don't kind of disregard like all the good things that like you're not really going to catch a lot of financial crime without KYC stuff,
right?
Without data collection. Like, you're just not going to. And maybe the answer is you just don't catch them, right?
Yeah.
As a result of the privacy, which I'd probably agree with you, actually. But I think it is okay to say, like, the crimes we are solving is because of that. But at the same time, like, that system that's built to do that, I don't know the numbers right off the top of my head, but it's something insane in magnitude, in cost, compared to how much you're like preventing or catching. Like, it's not even fucking close.
Right.
Which is stupid.
Yeah.
Like a private business probably wouldn't. Like, I always kind of compare, like, if the government's doing this, like, would a private business do this? Like, is this stupid? Like my city got a bill from the state of Oregon for taxes owed, and it was a literal penny. I felt like it was in a sitcom or some sort of skit. Like, it was a literal penny, and it was written on a piece of paper, and it had a couple other pieces of paper with like disclaimers, some bullshit, and it was in an envelope, right? Presumably, and they mailed it with a stamp. I mean, I don't know, maybe not a stamp. They might be able to opt out of that. And then, because it's part of our like official business, city council business, we had to make copies of all of them for every city councilor, right? So you have like a penny and you have like 10 pieces of paper.
Right.
And then we have to write a check, and there's people involved. I'm reading it. It's taking my time. It's like, what a crock of shit.
Yeah.
Dude, we just spent so much money just to process this fucking penny payment. It's like, there should be like a threshold where you just forget about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, dude. It just kills me when I see that. Like, and I think a private business would look at that and just be like, yeah, we're not going to do anything with that. It's not worth our time.
Yeah.
Even as a landlord, I have a bunch of tenants. There's a certain point, even like if someone owes me money, it's not worth me going after them like civilly. It's just not worth it. And it's better to be like, well, they'll owe me money, but I'll never see them again.
Yeah.
And that was like a small price to pay for them to, avoid me in public.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
yeah.
agree, man. I mean, like all that stuff is just,
It's
especially
enforcing the process. It's like,
well, I mean, with the AML stuff, like, if you trace it back, they were just trying to catch tax cheats, and they just keep clamping down on it. But it's like the bean counter mentality, like these little accountants, these little beady-eyed bean counters just go, no, we can just clamp down a little more. But I mean, it's just ultimately like these little control freaks that think they can exert control over a chaotic system. And ultimately, to your point, the mechanisms they put in place to stop that are just so profoundly expensive, so profoundly intrusive, and they don't work. So they keep going, well, it would only work if I just had a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And it never can work, because it's the easiest thing in the world to just circumvent all this shit on some level. And I think I've made a post ages back where it's like, look, the most controlled environment on planet Earth is a prison, and somehow they manage to extort people and have an economy and sell
That's
drugs, sell weapons, and all kinds of shit. And you go, if you can't clamp down on that in prison, what makes you think in the great big broad wide world you're going to somehow stop these guys from moving money around? I mean, it's the dumbest shit in the world.
It's a show. I think it's its own promotion and marketing of, that they have a purpose, we exist, right, and don't get away with it.
Yeah. And then it becomes self-reinforcing because all those assholes get a salary to do this shit.
Oh, they absolutely build on it too, for sure. There's a whole industry around it. And I actually do a lot of AML and Bank Secrecy Act training because I'm like CAM certified and stuff.
Right.
So it's funny that I have these opinions. And I'm like super like certified and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's I like it because it gives me a little bit of a, sometimes authority matters to people. And it's kind of like, they can't say I don't have any experience in it. It's like, right, no, I probably have more experience in it than you. Let's do that. How about that?
Yeah.
But in that training that I've built, I use a lot of example flow charts of actual fraud investigations that I worked as a detective, and I'll redact and black out like some of the information, but you can see like the money stolen from an account. It flowing down into other accounts, and you can and I explain like why they would do this, how they're like avoiding certain thresholds, or they're diversifying the flow of money. That way, if something happens and it does get held up at some point along the way, you don't lose all of it, right? You're not losing all your eggs by putting them all in one basket. You're kind of spreading it all out, and then you have different roles for different accomplices, in that process of moving money that was illegally taken, right? A lot of people seem to forget that. Like, you can't really, the whole idea behind money laundering is you have illicit money in the first place. And so sometimes that's going to be like a disagreeable thing. Like, I don't, like a lot of it is with that war on drugs, actually. So like any kind of drug proceed money is going to be considered illegal. And so they're trying to move it, and the money laundering like apparatus is trying to prevent it and catch it, right? And so a lot of it's like drug money focused. But so if you don't agree with the war on drugs already,
right,
like you're not going to agree with any of this.
You cut out 75%.
Which I don't agree with it. I don't like drugs, but I don't think it's effective at all. But the one thing though is there is some elements of like if you're offering like an online service and you're holding people's money and you have like they have an account with you, there are a lot of situations where people are dumb or they make mistakes or they get conned, and a bad actor, a criminal, ends up with access to their account, and like trying to recover that or trying to reset it, or guarantee that you do own this account, that does come with some anti-privacy things, right?
Right.
And obviously you're going to opt into that, presumably. Like if you open an account with your bank, like if you don't identify yourself to them, they're not going to and you don't have, like if you have an anonymous account and you lose access to it, you're probably never going to get it back, right?
Right.
And so there's not very many other options other than identifying yourself in some regard. And you could do other things. Like, I do like the idea of having alternatives though, where if you're gonna if you want emphasis on your privacy, I like the idea of having anonymous accounts with institutions. Like, I think you should be able to do that. But
Right.
if you get pwned, like, I don't know how you're going to recover that. Like, well, you can digitally sign with like a key that you own and prove your identity, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
But like, what if that gets pwned? Like, you're just screwed. And I like the idea of having that option though. But you should be able to opt into it, and you shouldn't. I mean, I guess you can complain if you get pwned, but it's like, I'm not going to feel sorry for you, I guess. I don't know. Like, what are you going to do?
The Swiss had that worked out real well for about 150 years. I mean, they passed laws in Switzerland that said if you're a banker and you reveal someone's private information, you're going to jail. And they put it, I mean, these were like 15, 20-year sentences. It wasn't like a trivial thing, like you get a little wrist slap. So they would set up accounts so you could go there. You'd have to identify yourself to one human being.
Oh, right.
Was sworn to secrecy by Swiss law, and then they just assign you a number. So as long as you had...
No, that's a good point. That's an interesting example of like the law guaranteeing privacy. Right now, we're the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, that all got blown up with AML and all this shit. I mean, it was ultimately those rules that broke that down. But for the first 150 years, it worked great. I mean, you had great banking privacy in Switzerland. And they still do a pretty good job of it, like certainly better than we do. But, I think there's structural ways to set that up. It's just, once you get the little beady-eyed bean counters involved, they can't let go of that control. They're little control freaks, and as long as you have some sort of system that allows the control freaks to come in and try and exert that control, they'll keep taking as much as they can, because they're just...
Yeah, and if you don't comply with them, you're going to go to jail probably. Yeah, if you have some sort of system, I mean, they're going to come after you. Like, it's insane. So
just recently, Swiss bank, I think it was this week, they opened up their vault for the media to come in and see all the gold they had. I don't know if you heard about that.
I didn't.
It's funny. So there were pictures and videos, and they had a show where they're like, "See, we're sitting on this gold." Like, kind of. And I don't know what it was for exactly, other than to prove that they have the gold. They've said they've had all this.
That's a proof of stake.
Yeah, proof of holdings. And then the funny question comes to mind. It's like, are these plated? Is this plated zinc? Or, you know, I mean, who knows? They're not assaying this stuff.
Yeah, it's harder to verify that.
Presuming it's gold, surely it's gold. But they had this little show to, it was a Swiss bank saying, we do have this gold, and see how we keep it and all that. But it was
honest.
we're honest. We have the gold. Yeah. I'd be interesting to know what's actually in Fort Knox anymore. I don't know, but
dust bunnies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just not interested in gold. Like, if you offer me gold, I would take it, but then I would sell it and turn it into Bitcoin, right? Like, I'm just not interested. I've never really been interested in it. But
well, I like looking at it. I mean, like I used to be a gold bug right before Bitcoin came along. I was a gold guy, and there's something about it, like just holding it in your hands. It's like I can see where Scrooge McDuck is just sitting there throwing gold over there. But there's something pretty magical about that metal. But yeah, today you just go, why? No, of course not, right? Like that's one of the easiest valuable commodities that is vulnerable to a wrench attack.
Exactly. It represents immutability, which is so rare anymore. It's like you can't destroy this, or it's like it
is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah. So there's that. But yeah, it's not Bitcoin.
It's not Bitcoin.
I wanted to touch upon thoughts you had about Julian Assange, because he got released. I have not heard anything from him. He's probably like detoxifying everything about his trauma he's had. I'd love to see him in public again at some level to start talking about his story, but he got released. I didn't really expect that or see that coming. I mean, I'm still...
Yeah, I didn't expect it, because last I heard, the United States government was trying to murder him. Right. So that's a big step away.
We call it extraordinary rendition.
Extraordinary rendition.
I'm glad to see him free.
Yeah.
I think he's more of a hero, not so much a criminal. So the fact that he had to take a plea deal, it's kind of bullshit. But I'd rather. I put myself in issues. It's like, I'm probably going to take a plea deal just to get released. Right? Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
Because where he was like one of the worst prisons in England too. So it's
Yeah.
He was like in
Not,
solitary confinement more or less for years.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he was an enemy of our government, and he was being tortured essentially. I mean, it's just
Oh yeah. Please.
like the process. You guys know this. The process is part of the punishment,
Right.
even if you're not guilty.
Yeah. 100%.
Yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
And it's unfortunate, but
Well, shoot, man, this has been quite a little discussion.
yeah, we went all over the place. It's good stuff.
Man, I'm glad
Well, I hope to see you guys tonight at the Bitcoin meetup in Wasco.
I'll be
They have
there.
good wings.
I'll be working on my book.
Drinks.
I'll be there. So
Sounds
I will
good, man.
in this evening, and we'll chat more about all this stuff. And then for future episodes we have, if you want to pop in from time to time, we can talk about
Sure.
from your world, because you've got the privacy and security in the law enforcement justice world, private sector with Swan, and you got a finger on the pulse on a lot of that stuff. And it adds a little mix to what we talk about time after time. So
Which is usually just blathering about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm happy to help blabber on about Bitcoin. It's what we do. It's fun.
yeah.
Awesome, man.
So, all right. Well, thanks, guys.
Sure.
See ya.
Cool. We'll see you next time. Well, that was a good one. We'll wrap this episode up, and then we'll see you next week, everybody. Bye. Thank you.